The air crackles with an unnerving silence, a silence that precedes a storm of disbelief. Imagine, if you dare, North Korean soldiers, not on the DMZ, not in some obscure training camp, but in the very heart of Russia, in Kursk. This isn't some far-fetched scenario from a dystopian novel. This is reality, or at least a grim version of it that we must confront. The reports coming out of the region are not just disturbing, they're utterly perplexing. We are talking about a level of desperation so profound that it defies rational explanation. What unfolds is a tragedy of immense proportions, a series of events that will challenge everything you think you know about geopolitical alliances and the fragile nature of human conflict. Prepare yourself, because the truth is far more terrifying than fiction, a truth that involves self-inflicted wounds on an unimaginable scale. This is not just a story about battles. It is a descent into madness, a theater of the absurd, unfolding where we least expected it. This tale of Kursk will haunt you, and it begins now. We'll be diving into 7 chapters that will break down this unbelievable situation and give you insight on every part of this tragedy. Don't skip ahead, as the most important conclusion comes only in the final chapter, so stick around. Chapter 1, The Whispers Begin, 0:30 onwards. The initial reports were nothing more than hushed whispers, rumors that spread like wildfire through the dark corners of the internet and the shadowy corridors of intelligence agencies. There was talk of a strange contingent, soldiers dressed in uniforms that didn't quite match the standards of the Russian military, operating near Kursk. These weren't your typical Russian conscripts. These soldiers were different in bearing, in the rigidity of their movements, and even in their language, a strange, stilted dialect that raised more questions than it answered. The first confirmed visual was a grainy video, captured by a local farmer, which showed a group of soldiers moving in lockstep, their faces obscured by shadows, their demeanor unsettlingly robotic. They carried weapons that were not entirely standard for the region, a mix of older Soviet-era designs and some more modern equipment, some looking like North Korean Type 88 assault rifles, along with more outdated AK-47 variants. Whispers of North Korean involvement began to surface, dismissed as ridiculous and outright impossible, given that North Korea is geographically located thousands of miles away, and no one could imagine what interest they might have in the Kursk region. The local population was perplexed, but as the rumors began to gain some credibility, a sense of fear began to grip the area. This was not some conventional military exercise. It was something far more sinister, a story that was quickly spiraling into the realm of the bizarre. The idea that North Korean troops were somehow operating in the Kursk region of Russia, an area known for its historical significance in World War II, seemed completely improbable. The questions grew louder. What were they doing there? How did they even get there? And most importantly, what did their presence mean for the already fragile state of global affairs? The answers, as they began to surface, were far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined and involved self-inflicted tragedy at a shocking level. This was not a planned invasion. It was an act of despair, a final, horrific message echoing from a regime pushed to its very breaking point. Chapter 2, The Deployment, a geopolitical puzzle, continues. The unfolding situation in Kursk posed more questions than answers. The logistical operation alone was staggering. How did a contingent of North Korean soldiers manage to travel thousands of miles undetected across international borders to arrive in the heart of Russia? Initial theories were all over the place, from covert operations involving the use of Russian cargo ships to more outlandish ideas involving unmarked trains sneaking across borders under the cover of night. Satellite images, however, soon revealed a more precise explanation, a combination of airlifts using Russian transport aircraft and disguised trains, a massive effort concealed within the shadows of normal logistical traffic. It was a deliberate and carefully orchestrated operation, designed to bypass scrutiny by using the usual transport routes. The weapons they carried, although not standard for the Russian military, were still of considerable force. The mixture of vintage AK-47s and the more modern indigenous North Korean Type 88 assault rifle presented an interesting, though somewhat disturbing picture. It seemed as if North Korea was not sending its most elite troops. but more likely a contingent of soldiers with mixed equipment, likely those with lower training levels. This raised a question: were they expendable? Why would such a high-risk operation be entrusted to troops that are not considered elite? The geopolitical chessboard seemed to have tilted precariously. The very fact that a foreign military force could enter Russian territory without apparent resistance was a glaring indication of deep, underlying tensions within the complex structure of international relations. It was also a bold slap in the face for Russia, which prides itself in its ability to control its borders and project its power. The international community watched with bated breath as the situation in Kursk teetered on the edge of disaster. The details increasingly bizarre and disturbing. This bizarre deployment was not just a military maneuver. It was a statement, a cry for help from a country that had reached its breaking point, a cry that was about to turn into a terrifying scream. The true nature of this deployment was far more unsettling than mere military maneuvering. This was a desperate, tragic, last stand. Chapter 3, The Battle of Kursk Tragedy Unfolds, continues. The events in Kursk rapidly deteriorated from a confusing deployment to a full-blown tragedy. It wasn't a battle in the traditional sense, a clash of two opposing military forces. It was an act of self-destruction, an organized, almost ritualistic self-immolation. The North Korean soldiers, entrenched around an abandoned training facility near Kursk, refused all attempts at communication. Reports from the ground indicated that they had begun using their weapons, but not in the way expected. They were turning them on themselves. Eyewitness accounts, initially fragmented and unreliable, coalesced into a chilling picture of organized suicide. The North Koreans, instead of engaging with any potential Russian response, initiated a disturbing ritual of self-destruction. The specific methods varied, from firing into the air and into their own positions to ingesting what appeared to be poison. The sheer scale of the incident was nothing short of horrifying. The abandoned military facility became a death trap as the North Korean troops used every means at their disposal to end their own lives. Russian soldiers, initially confused by the strange behavior, were soon faced with the gruesome task of attempting to secure the area and provide assistance to any survivors, although they were very few. The reasons for this mass suicide began to circulate, each more horrifying than the last. Some suggested it was the result of extreme indoctrination, an act of martyrdom for their leader, Jong-Un. Others speculated it might be a protest, a final desperate plea for freedom, albeit in the most extreme way possible. The whole incident left an indelible mark, questioning everything that was known about the mindset of these soldiers and how they are seen by their leadership. This was not an organized military campaign. It was a mass suicide disguised as a military operation, and it left everyone shaken to the core. Chapter 4, Kim Jong-un's misdirection, unmasking the deception, continues. The most baffling aspect of the Kursk incident was the reaction, or lack thereof, from Pyongyang. Kim Jong-un, the enigmatic leader of North Korea, maintained a bizarre silence on the unfolding events. This silence was interpreted by many as an admission of involvement, but as more information came to light, it revealed a much more sinister plan. It was not just that he didn't acknowledge the incident. He actively denied that his country's forces were involved in any of it. North Korean state media began to promote a narrative where the troops were defectors, dissidents who had run away with weapons and were using them against their own people. This blatant attempt to rewrite the facts, however, was seen by the world as an obvious misdirection. Intelligence agencies around the world began to dissect the evidence, looking for a rational explanation, and found a pattern of deceit in the information being distributed by North Korea. The equipment used by the soldiers was identified as being from North Korean stockpiles. The uniforms were the same as those of specific North Korean units, and even the language spoken was unique to specific parts of North Korea. The attempt to misdirect the world was clumsy and exposed the desperation of the North Korean regime. The whole thing was a meticulously planned operation, which was designed not to conquer any territory, but to achieve something far more diabolical. The troops, it seemed, were expendable, sacrificed on the altar of political theater, and what exactly they were trying to achieve was a complete mystery to everyone except those who planned it. The denial from North Korea was not just a political maneuver, it was a cover-up for a plan that went far beyond the immediate tragedy in Kursk. It was an act of deception, aimed at masking a deeper, more disturbing reality. Chapter 5. The Hidden Purpose. The Truth Emerges continues. The pieces of the Kursk puzzle began to fit together, revealing a shocking truth that went beyond the self-inflicted tragedy of the North Korean soldiers. The operation, it turned out, was never about military conquest or strategic positioning. It was a meticulously planned distraction. The goal was not to engage the Russian military, but to focus the world's attention on the bizarre events in Kursk, while something else, something far more insidious, was happening elsewhere. While the world was fixated on the unfolding tragedy, North Korea was busy with another operation, one that was obscured by the smoke and confusion of the Kursk tragedy. The sudden influx of North Korean special forces in different regions around the world became evident. North Korea, under the guise of a mass defection of its military, was deploying its most capable special operations forces to strategically important areas of the world. The Kursk operation had been a cover for a global maneuver that changed the geopolitical landscape in ways that are still not completely understood. This was not just a desperate last stand. It was an ingenious diversion, a carefully choreographed act of misdirection that concealed a strategic gambit of significant implications. It was the ultimate deception, using the horror of Kursk to veil a far more dangerous, far more expansive plan. The real target of North Korea's actions wasn't Russia, but the global order, and the events at Kursk were merely the opening act of a much larger, more complex drama. The horror at Kursk, as gruesome as it was a smokescreen. The true target was the fragility of global security, and the real operation was the infiltration of strategic areas. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. Global Implications continues. The aftermath of the Kursk incident was a period of intense global uncertainty. The world was trying to come to grips with the sheer audacity and horror of what had unfolded. The international community was left scrambling, trying to piece together the full extent of North Korea's machinations. The revelations that Kursk had been a diversionary tactic sent shockwaves through governments worldwide. The trust in international relations was broken, and countries were left wondering what else they had been fooled into not noticing. The strategic deployments of North Korean special forces had already begun to take effect, with reports of sabotage in critical infrastructure regions and cyber attacks on important government servers and financial systems. The scale of this operation was unprecedented and posed a grave threat to global security. The UN Security Council was paralyzed, unable to agree on a unified response, with deep divisions and suspicions creating a new geopolitical standoff. The events at Kursk were no longer just an isolated incident. They were a stark reminder of the fragility of the world order. The incident forced governments worldwide to reassess their intelligence capabilities, to understand how they had been so thoroughly deceived. The world was left staring into the abyss, wondering how far things would go. The implications of the events at Kursk were staggering, a stark warning that the world had entered a new era of uncertainty. It was a grim reminder of how easily deception and misdirection can undermine the very foundations of global stability. This bizarre and tragic event forced a global reevaluation, and the world was left shaken and afraid for what might come next. Chapter 7. The Unexpected Twist. The Final Revelation continues. As the dust settled on the Kursk incident, a final, unexpected revelation emerged. The North Korean soldiers were not, in fact, soldiers in the traditional sense. They were unwitting pawns in a much larger game. The mass suicide was not a show of loyalty or martyrdom. It was an involuntary act, triggered by a sophisticated, mind-altering substance that had been secretly administered to the troops. The so-called suicide ritual was, in fact, a macabre experiment, an act of involuntary self-destruction brought on by a toxic compound hidden in their supplies. The soldiers, in their final moments, had been nothing more than living test subjects, their deaths part of a horrifying experiment. It turned out that the mission was not about military strategy or political posturing. It was a chilling example of a regime's ability to carry out the most extreme experiments without any ethical limitations. The truth about Kursk was not just disturbing, it was terrifying. It revealed the depths of depravity to which a totalitarian regime could sink. Kim Jong-Un hadn't been fooling Putin. He had been fooling everyone. The Kursk incident was not just a tragedy, It was a monstrous demonstration of the capacity for human cruelty, a chilling reminder that the line between reality and nightmare is often frighteningly thin. The world was not just shaken, it was fundamentally changed. The events of Kursk will forever be a symbol of how easily deception can mask an unspeakable horror, and how far we still are from understanding the true nature of evil. As you can see, the events in Kursk were far more intricate and disturbing than initially believed. The tragedy was not just a military incident, but a calculated act of deception and manipulation on a global scale. We have seen how a calculated misdirection can cause a whole world to be distracted and fooled. Now you know the whole truth behind the story, and you understand why it was important to watch until the end.